Right, so greetings, hello. Welcome back to the Philosophy Club here in the middle of Gaul, in the Druid stronghold, close to where Vercingetorix did his stand against Caesar. He lost, but he was still heroic. And as an Archdruid of the Peace Druids of Europe, I honour and salute his memory. May we always stand up to evil, even if we're going to lose. So I just want to honour the fact we just had Ascension Day in the Catholic calendar, which is a miraculous event. You know, it happened according to the Gospels. After the resurrection, Christ took his disciples up to a high place. It's not specified where. Probably Mount Hermon is what I came to the conclusion. Which is sort of on the border between Israel and Lebanon, and then he ascends into heaven. Now, in France, it's still an official holiday, which I think is absolutely superb, and thank you for that. In my commentary on the Gospels, I went into this in great detail. Here's the recently arrived Gospel of St. Mark commentary, with a picture of the church here in Betet, and the beautiful local countryside. And I go into it in detail. And then even more complex is the commentary on the Gospel of St. Matthew, which gives much more details on the Ascension. Could it have actually happened? You know, how? What's the physics of that? Is that possible? There are millions of unanswered questions which I go into in the Gospel commentary. And, you know, it's very interesting. So, yes, it was a lot of work to put the footnotes to these two commentaries, 500 pages, Gospel of Matthew. And I had a visit from my youngest daughter, Shanti, just a couple of weeks ago, who's about to go and do a theology degree at Oxford University, training in theology, and she wants to be a vicar. On the 22nd of July, we just had the online Mary Magdalene Studies Association conference, which was great, and we had some good speakers come. And of course, everyone wants to know, you know, are the Gospels genuine? Are they for real? How do we know? Many people say no, they were written a long time after the events. They're just made up stories, hearsay. They don't stand up. We can't rely on them. I take a sort of sceptical view of the Gospels, but I err on the side of faith, because I think with Pascal, the French philosopher, that one has to use doubt in order to find faith. I mean, I don't see why these Gospels would have come into being unless something miraculous had happened underlying them all. And I'm going to be doing my commentaries on Luke and John as well, which are, each of them looks at it from a different story. And also Thomas and Mary Magdalene. So I'm looking forward to Shanti as she's training to be a vicar. She will have to be coping with her father's, rambling commentaries on the New Testament. We had one of the speakers at Mary Magdalene saying all Paul's letters are fake. They're just rhetorical exercises. They're not real. They weren't by St. Paul at all. That's an extremist position. I don't think I share that. But it's always good to hear from people you don't agree with. And yeah, one has to have dialectic and discussion about these things. Which leads me to my next point. I've just published 2 days ago a new book, which I've been working on for the last year, called On the Logic of Peace. It was originally designed as a paper for an article for a professional journal, an academic journal. The editor of the journal said, no, Thomas, we won't publish it, it's too long. Publish it as a book instead. So I've done that. I published it yesterday, On the Logic of Peace. And as a young philosophy student, I never was attracted to logic. I found it tedious, boring. The lecturers were terrible. They never explained it. You know, we never read the source text. It was just a sort of a mind exercise, boring and dull. Years later, when I actually read Aristotle in depth, and when I read the history of logic, I realised this is actually really interesting. And particularly I was interested by a feminist historian of logic called Andrea Nye, who made it all come alive. starting with Parmenides and on through Aristotle and to the scholastics, Thomas Aquinas and Abelard. And I realised logic is incredibly important, actually. But we have a combative logic at the moment governing academia and thought. So you make a position, somebody else attacks it, you make a counter position, and you have like a fight mentally and verbally. That's the state of logic at the moment. You win an argument by defeating the opponent. It's a very militaristic idea. I'm proposing a whole new way of doing logic, which is what I call the logic of peace. And in the second volume, I published the first volume yesterday, I'm working on the second volume, I'm going to talk about Hegel's logic and Marx's attempt to use that in a constructive way, which I think partly succeeded and partly failed. I'll be doing that. Which is that logic is really about mind trying to synthesize rival and divergent views and come up with a holistic commonality. And I'll be, reviewing Hegel's attempt to find a new logic. He was on to what I will be arguing is the logic of peace. I've also been reviewing Islamic thinkers, Islamic logical thinkers, Ibn Sina, great, amazing philosopher who knew Aristotle back to front. And he actually improved Aristotle's logic by bringing in temporality. Because Aristotle's sort of logic can make you work out what is the case, but in frozen time, what Ibn Sina did is said, okay, what if you introduce time? Maybe something is true now, but will it be tomorrow or next week? What if things change? What if the parameters change? We need a logic that can cope with temporality, he said. And, nobody in the West had thought about it. It was an Islamic thinker who came up with that one. So it's been fascinating to review. And then there's the Buddhist traditions of logic, which I've also looked at. They have a whole chapter. Most important being Nagarjuna, who was the most important Buddhist philosopher and logical thinker. So anyway, I've enjoyed writing it and publishing it, and now I'm going to be working on volume 2, which is going to take a while. In another part of the forest, I've been studying, and this is an example of how not to do logical decision-making in international relations, right? I've been reading a history of the CIA, particularly the founder and chief guy, Alan Dulles, and his biography, and it's by an American intellectual called David Talbot, who lives in Los Angeles, who's still alive at the time of speaking. And he reveals the details of what the CIA have been up to under this guy, Alan Dulles, which I find utterly, utterly shocking. As a historian, this is my field, Cold War stuff. Alan Dulles was station chief in Bern in Switzerland at the latter part of World War II. He befriended a whole bunch of Nazis as like a serious friend. He helped rescue them from Italian partisans who were trying to arrest them and try them. And he then employed them to help the early CIA when they fled to the West. He said, you've got lots of intelligence we need. You've been fighting communists for years, now we're going to be fighting them, so we need you to join us. And Alan Dulles compromised, I think, the beginning of American intelligence. And he then saw his mission as fighting communism everywhere. And anything that was slightly leftish was to be fought, not just communism. And the most shocking thing I've just discovered, the chapter I just read, was about the Congo. Patrice Lumumba was a great charismatic socialist leader who wanted the Congo to be free of Belgian colonialism. They'd suffered hugely under the Belgians. And he wanted an independent state called the Congo. He was a highly intellectual guy, university trained, very clever chap, proud of African heritage. He wanted Africa for the Africans. He was a pioneer of African independence. And Dulles decided he had to go. He made a personal decision as head of the CIA. This guy has to be assassinated. So he put in a death squad who basically beat this guy to death. And if you have the stomach for it, read this book, because what they did to Lumumba is absolutely shocking. He was just a guy like me, just an intellectual who believed in a left-wing approach to sharing the resources of society. And he was beaten to death at the instructions of Alan Dulles. Well, I think it's time for Americans to come to terms with this heritage. And for us in the world generally, because that's not the only thing they've done. The CIA have been doing some other pretty shocking stuff. And I'm just coming to the chapter on Kennedy. Kennedy basically tried to sack Dulles and succeeded. I haven't got to it yet, I'm about to read it. I'm pretty sure that the author will have done his homework and said Dulles was part of the assassination coup that killed off Kennedy. Because Kennedy was trying to make peace. He was a Catholic peace activist, effectively. And he wanted to end the Cold War there and then. He was also in favour of African nationalism. He wasn't told about the assassination of Lumumba for a month after he came into power, and they did the killing the week before he actually became president, because they knew he would never authorise it. So they had this African nationalist leader killed off by the CIA in the week before Kennedy came into office, and he wasn't even told about it for a month. And when he heard it, he just was utterly shocked. And he had a photographer with him in the White House, and took photographs. The guy, poor old Kennedy, could not believe what had happened. And he then got rid of Dulles. I think what happened is Dulles then had him assassinated. But I'll share more details next week on that. So meanwhile, that brings us to the Trump and Putin theatre show in Alaska. Because, my position on this is, don't forget, I'm a playwright, and I've been an actor, and I do believe in theatre. This is great theatre, isn't it? It's crazy. I don't agree with what Putin's been doing, nor what Trump and Doge and Musk have been doing. But if you're going to have crazy theatre people, at least get them talking peace. I don't know that they were talking peace. I think they were.
In Alaska.
In Alaska. I believe Trump even raised the issue of global warming. Sorry, I think Putin raised the issue of global warming, which is something that I think is very important, because Alaska's on fire. It's got huge numbers of forest fires, and so's the whole of Siberia. So's the whole of southern Europe, France. We're all on fire here. We should be talking peace, ceasefires, and using our intellectual resources not to bomb and kill each other, but to make peace so that we can put these fires out. And if it takes theatre to do that, then so be it. And also, there's the ongoing war in Gaza, which is catastrophic, and I would like to see the resources going into the Ukraine-Russia war stopped and going to support the rebuilding of Gaza, as I've said in my Solomon option. So we'll see what happens. I believe the European leaders are all off to Washington on Monday, tomorrow, to have subsidiary meetings with Trump. And, I'd like to see everyone join up and agree that a peace. I think the idea that I came up with the Solomon option is we freeze the lines in Ukraine-Russia war and then divert all the stuff towards helping resolve the Middle East crisis and helping the people of Gaza. So things are, moving in the right direction, I would say. This is, of course, my own PhD, this area, the Cold War. That's where I did 15 years of research. I went to Moscow, I went to America, I travelled all over, I went to 35 countries. I came up with the idea of, to solve the Cold War, to solve these frozen conflicts everywhere, we have to go to a new level of doing history, which I call transpersonal history. So we have to factor in the fact that we're souls in incarnation here. We're not governed by biological necessity, by egotism, by greed, by economic concerns only. We actually, I believe, as souls in incarnation, we have an innate altruism in us. And what our leaders should be doing is activating that, the goodness inherent Ukrainian people, in Russian people, in American people, in Israeli people, in Palestinian people. You know, there's enough residual goodness in us to say, oh, actually, we want a different kind of history. We want a peace history. That was what I said in the thesis, and I think it's still valid. And, you know, but history is taking a while to catch up. Okay, then the other thing I want to say is I'm also working on the Jane's book of peace declarations. We had this conference in February in 2024 when my daughter Sophia was here, and we had to get up at dawn and give talks online because it was run from India. Sophia gave a paper about the role of the arts and its importance for peacemaking, and although she's no longer with us, you know, it's going to be included in the volume, which I'm now editing. It should be published in a week or so. And it's that Jane perspective, which is a very transpersonal kind of perspective, is you rise above the ideological dogmatisms and you go to a place of suspension of judgment, anikant-vada. Jainism, of course, is the two white boxes in the middle of the periodic table. And you practice personal non-violence in order to have the serenity to go to that place of surrendering ego. And Shanti loved this. So I'm working on that. She was interested in poetry as a practicing poet, and the other project I'm working on is a book of her poems. I have about 90 which she gave me and I found in notebooks, and I'm going to be publishing a volume of Sophie's poetry along with photographs illustrating her life story. I have photographs going right back. In fact, this is the first photo in the book. I love this photo. I'm holding Sophia as a baby. She's about 1 year old. And there's her sister, Helen, in front. And I'm with one of my best friends, a chap called John Francis Phipps. Together we founded Philosophers and Historians for Peace in Britain in the 80s. His dad was the British ambassador to Germany and later to France, Sir Eric Phipps. They were from an old Roman Catholic family, and they had a manor house in Wiltshire, established aristocracy, really. And they used to own the building that later became Buckingham Palace in London. They were a Catholic family, so the king commandeered it and said, no, you can't have that, we want that, and turned it into Buckingham Palace. But he's an amazing man, John Francis. He's dead now. He knew my family very well, and we had meetings every full moon in our flat in Notting Hill Gate, and Sophie was born at that time. So yes, homage to John Francis, who's in the afterlife, and I'm sure he's helping prepare a reception for Sophie, who he knew well, growing up. So lots of pictures like this, historical pictures, will be in the book of poems. I want to say just a little word on theatre. I've been counselling my godson, who's deciding what career to do, what degree to take, and I looked up his astrological chart, and it all said theatre, theatre. He loves acting, he's very good at it. I used to be in the Brighton Youth Theatre when I was a teenager, and I think acting really helps make you as a person, gives you confidence. Improvisation is a skill that you learn, and life is theatre. But we need a peace theatre, so I'm hoping that my godson goes off and does train as a theatre guy and becomes the next Kenneth Branagh. Theatre helps with catharsis. It helps work through the traumas. Auguste Boal, who created the Theatre of the Oppressed, people that studied with him, they do theatre in conflict zones to get everyone to work through the traumas, not having to kill each other, but just to have that empathy, that shared feeling, which is catharsis. So I think more theatre, please, and less wars. It's interesting we talk about the war theatre, the theatre of combat and so on. I'd rather have a peace theatre. I'd rather we spent money on peace theatre than war theatre. I mean, I saw a play once in Moscow. Brilliant. I mean, Russia has a brilliant theatrical tradition. I met young actors there performing. let's have more plays, please, between Russian and Ukrainian and American and French actors. I met a chap who's working with a circus called I Love Circus or something, which is touring around Europe at the moment. And they do physical theatre, kind of acrobatics, and circus is a kind of theatre. Which leads me to the International Delphic Academy. I'm still working with that. I think the Delphic movement, the Delphic Games, since classical antiquity was putting on theatre instead of war. You couldn't participate in the Delphic Academy or the Delphic Games if you were fighting. There had to be a truce whilst that was going on. I want to bring that back. We've also just had this week a meeting of the World Peace Gardens Network. And I was saying, well, who's doing theatre in gardens around the world? Whenever I see a play outdoors in a garden, it becomes magically alive. I've seen Midsummer Night's Dream several times. And I was doing some research. I love AI, it can find out stuff. So Shakespeare wrote about 38 plays, only 10 of which are set in Britain. The rest are in France, Italy, Greece. He was an internationalist. I believe, well, we know he visited Italy because he signed his name in the Roman College in Rome. Pretty sure he came to France several times. So he was an internationalist, and this was always my argument against Brexit. You know, as a Shakespearean actor myself, back in the day, you know, I find nationalism is such a poverty thing. A true person loves every country. Every country is their homeland. I'm French. I'm also a lover of Italy and Spain and Greece and Scotland and Ireland and all the countries of the Americans and the Middle East. You know, they're all my homeland. And I think Shakespeare, were he alive, would say the same. So we need the World Peace Gardens to have gardens where they can perform. So that's my little roundup of the news. You don't hear this on the normal news, but this to me is the real news. It's the muse news, shall we say. Okay, any questions or comments before we move on?
I find it interesting that tomorrow's travels to Washington shows how much European countries trust the circus act that is now living in the White House in Washington. They do not allow Zelensky to move into the White House alone again.
That's an interesting reading, because the last time he was ambushed. And
absolutely, he was ambushed by a hillbilly called
J.D. Vance,
yeah,
who was kicked out of the hotel in the Cotswolds, I believe.
The staff said, if you serve him, if he comes in here, we'll
That was amazing, that, actually. I couldn't quite believe it, but I presume it's true.
So do I. It's been on BBC as well. It's BBC News, so I assume it's...
It was interesting. But, so it's going to be great theatre, what is said. I just think they need to... One thing I heard that's quite interesting is they're moving towards not just a ceasefire, but an actual peace deal.
Full peace.
For Ukraine.
Yeah.
Like a full-on peace thing. But obviously, let's hope they succeed.
Let's do.
And
it's been on for far too long.
Yeah. The war should be stopped.
And also, what's happening in Israel now that the population of Israel has said enough is enough.
They're rising up, aren't they?
Rising
demonstrating.
Full.
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands.
Blocking the roads into Tel Aviv. And, yes, and the minister, the chief general is complaining about this plan to attack Gaza City, which would be a nightmare. Logistically and
the old Prime Minister, what's his name?
Olmert,
yeah.
He said we should all take to the streets and do civil disobedience. Yeah. It's good. I mean, that's the Israel I know, because I've been there several times, and I know the people of conscience, and the actual believers in Judaism, the real Orthodox, hardcore believers in God, are all against this nonsense of nationalistic Zionism, which was an import into the Holy Land. It's not God sanctioned. It has no credence. It was an import from European nationalism, invented by European Jews who then went and settled there and took their ideas.
The worst part about the whole thing with the Zionism is if somebody protests about what the Israeli government is doing, they call it anti-Semitism.
Which is a nonsense.
So what do they do then when more than 50% of the Israeli population protest against it? Is that also anti-Semitism?
Well, the whole idea should be, I mean, I've argued we should use the term philo-Semitism to describe an anti-Zionist position, because a philo-Semite loves all the Semitic people, including Palestinians who are Semitic, including the founders of Christianity who were all Semitic, the Phoenicians who gave us the alphabet, they're Semitic people, the Akkadians who gave us cuneiform writing from Akkad, the Mesopotamian peoples, they were all Semitic, Babylonian. North Africa, the ancient Egyptians were Semitic, Hamito-Semitic. Their language was similar to Hebrew. A lot of the Bible was taken ideas from Egypt. Moses was trained in Egyptian theology. So I'm a philo-Semite. I love all that. I've studied it in detail. I've written about it in the 99 Names of Peace. That's why I love Christianity, Islam and Judaism, because Arabic is also a Semitic language. So philo-Semitism embraces and respects all those traditions and wants them all to get along, using scholarship and learning, which is my modality in education, to encourage them all to get along. The term anti-Semitism is a mistake invented by a European socialist, and he apologised for it. He said, I've invented a silly concept.
Oh, they're taking it to heart in the States.
Well, it's just being used by extreme right-wing Zionists to attack people of progressive mentality, really, and it's a non sequitur. It's just a foolish idea. But no, thanks for raising it. Right. Okay, so let's move on and do our one of our 99 Names of Peace to start with. Why don't we do that? Because we talked about them. Why don't you, Armel, choose a number between 53 and 99?
67.
67. Right, let's see what we get here. It's like a lucky dip. Talk of the devil. It's spiritual communism is the project.
Whoa.
And the language is Romanian. I've been to Romania, and it's a fascinating place. I studied, Romanian, Balkan, East European history as part of my history degree, and I acquired a taste for its complexity, because Eastern Europe is incredibly complex. Romanian history is full of moving parts. It was under the Ottoman regime for many centuries, Islamified, but never completely accepted that. Christianity remained. Further back in time, it had ancient pagan culture, very sophisticated. It's got the Danube flowing through it. And the Romans turned up and conquered it. I think they called it Dacia, and there were two parts of Dacia, the left and right parts of the Danube. Linguists have gone into what was the language spoken by these Dacians, and did it influence Romanian? To some extent, yes, I go into all this. But mostly the language of Romanian was from the Roman settlers that came in. After it became part of the Roman Empire for 300 years, they spoke Latin, and Romanian is a descendant of the Latin spoken by these people in Dacia. And it's a fascinating language because of that. And I give all the details here in the chapter. And then it became part of the Ottoman Empire, and they brought in their own languages and religions. But then in the 19th century, with the the Balkan states gradually broke away from the Ottoman Empire. The Greeks started that with a revolt, with Byron and the Romantic poets all wanting to liberate Greece from the Turkish yoke. And there was a similar independence movement going on in Romania. And I've documented all that in the thing on the language. And then, of course, it got its independence. It became a successful state. It had an enlightenment. It had many great playwrights, poets, writers. You know, there's a whole history of these poets that I've gone into. It had a strong Jewish community. Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor, was from Romania. Sadly, when the Nazis invaded and captured it, they did holocausts and killed a lot of the Romanian Jews, but others survived. And scholars are interested in their history. And then after the war, it fell under the Russian orbit, and they introduced communism. Some people accepted that, others said, no, we don't like this, and went underground and resisted it. But by and large, I think Romanian communism was a project that seemed to most of them better than Nazism, and so they went for it. And they had some great writers and intellectuals. Mircea Eliade, one of the greatest historians of religions, was Romanian. He ended up in Chicago University. One of the great, intellectuals of the 20th century. Eugene Ionesco was a playwright in Romania. He pioneered the theatre of the absurd. They're highly intellectual people, the Romanians. Now that's why I chose, for the project that goes with Romanian as a language, I thought we should revive this concept of spiritual communism. I was brought up in a family in Brighton where my mother was a Marxist and a communist, a member of the Communist Party. And so I was taught communism is the next step for humanity. This is logical, it's scientific, Marx has proved it. Let's all go down the good red road. The trouble was, as I read Marx and as I studied at university, I felt, no, it's not logical. It's a sleight of hand. It's an enforcement of a straitjacket. And I rebelled against the compulsory materialism element in Marxism. It didn't sit with me as a young thinker, as a young poet and intellectual and philosopher. So I did a lot of research into this when I did my degree. And I came to the view, and I studied in huge detail on the origins of Marxism. And I wrote a paper that was published later on the esoteric origins of Marxism. And I discovered that most of these early Marxists and people that influenced Marx were deeply spiritual thinkers, and that he himself was even. And I discovered that a lot of them were interested in, let's say, alternative spirituality. People like our local, the mayor of Boussac here, Pierre Leroux, author of Humanity. These people were interested in Freemasonry, esotericism, the occult, socialism, but not enforced with a materialist package like Marx wanted. So I got interested in what you can call spiritual communism. And I went to Russia at the time in 1990 to Moscow. I was elected coordinator of Philosophers of Peace. And we were having really brilliant conversations about, so Gorbachev was still president, so they wanted to move away from straitjacket, dogmatic Marxism and communism, but they wanted a sort of humanist